Imagine going to sleep believing the world is stable, and waking up to discover two of the most powerful military forces on Earth are exchanging attacks. Somewhere tonight, parents are trying to reassure frightened children as missiles light up the sky. Soldiers are preparing for missions they hoped would never come. World leaders are locked in emergency meetings, knowing that one wrong decision could change history forever. This isn't a movie. It isn't a military exercise. It's happening right now. The United States has launched strikes against Iranian targets, and Iran has fired back. The question is no longer whether tensions have escalated. The question now is, how far can this go before the entire region, and perhaps the world, is pulled into something much bigger? Tonight, we'll separate facts from speculation, explain exactly what happened, why it happened, and what comes next. Before we dive deeper, I want to ask you something. In a world where breaking news moves faster than the truth, having reliable information matters more than ever. If you value careful analysis over panic and facts over rumors, please subscribe. It helps us continue bringing you in-depth reporting that explains the stories shaping our world. Good evening and welcome. Tonight, we are covering one of the most consequential and dangerous developments in the Middle East in recent memory. What we are witnessing is a significant escalation between two nations that have been locked in a decades-long conflict of ideology, power, and influence. Tonight, we break down everything you need to know about the latest military exchanges between the United States and Iran, what led to this moment, what happened on the ground, and what this means for the region and the world. Let us start from the very beginning, because context matters enormously when we are talking about a situation this complex and this dangerous. The relationship between the United States and Iran has never been simple. It has been defined by decades of tension, mistrust, sanctions, proxy conflicts, and moments that have repeatedly brought both nations to the brink of open warfare. But what is happening right now represents something that analysts, military officials, and foreign policy experts are describing as a new and deeply alarming chapter in that long and troubled history. For weeks leading up to these strikes, American intelligence had been tracking what officials described as credible and imminent threats emanating from Iranian-backed forces across the region. The United States military, operating under orders from the highest levels of command, had been on heightened alert. Assets were repositioned, contingency plans were reviewed, and diplomatic backchannels were buzzing with warnings and ultimatums that, as we now know, went unheeded. The situation had been building for some time, fed by a complex web of events that includes attacks on American personnel and assets, heightened Iranian nuclear activity, and the ongoing destabilization of the broader Middle East region through Iran's extensive network of proxy militias and armed groups. When American forces launched their strikes on Iranian targets, it was not, at least according to American officials, an act of aggression. It was described as a defensive and proportional response to provocations that had crossed what the administration called clear and established red lines. The targets that were selected by American military planners were said to be carefully chosen to minimize civilian casualties while delivering a significant blow to Iran's military infrastructure and to the command and control systems that are used to coordinate and direct proxy forces across the region. We are talking about targets that included weapons storage facilities, command centers, and positions associated with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which the United States has designated as a terrorist organization. The strikes themselves were carried out with the kind of precision that the United States military has spent decades developing and refining. Long-range munitions, air assets, and potentially naval firepower were all part of the operation. Multiple locations were reportedly hit in a coordinated fashion, designed to overwhelm Iranian defensive capabilities and achieve the mission objectives in the shortest possible time frame. Military officials were careful to note that every effort was made to avoid hitting sites that could result in mass civilian casualties or that could trigger an even more catastrophic escalation. But here is where the situation becomes even more complicated and more dangerous. Iran did not simply absorb these strikes and go silent. Iranian leadership, including senior figures within the Revolutionary Guard and political officials at the highest levels of the government in Tehran, responded almost immediately with defiant rhetoric and, critically, with military action of their own. Iran, as this broadcast title tells you, fired back. And when Iran fires back, the calculus of the entire situation changes dramatically. Iranian forces launched a series of retaliatory strikes targeting what Tehran described as American military positions and interests in the region. The nature and extent of those retaliatory actions are still being fully assessed, but early reports indicate that Iranian missiles, drones, and potentially other projectiles were directed at targets associated with American military presence. This is not the first time we have seen Iran use such tactics. We saw a version of this dynamic play out in January of 2020, following the killing of General Qasem Soleimani, when Iran launched ballistic missile strikes against American bases in Iraq. But what is happening now appears to carry a different and potentially more severe set of implications. What makes this moment so significant and so alarming to those who study these issues closely is the speed at which events are moving. When military exchanges happen this rapidly, when both sides are trading strikes in something approaching real time, the risk of miscalculation, of unintended escalation, of a chain of events spiraling out of control becomes very real and very serious. Military planners on both sides understand this risk, but the political pressures, the domestic audiences, the ideological commitments, and the strategic interests at play can sometimes override the cooler heads that are needed to prevent a bad situation from becoming catastrophic. Let us talk about what Iran represents as a military adversary, because this is important context for understanding just how serious this situation is. Iran is not a small or inconsequential military power. It has one of the most sophisticated military establishments in the Middle East, with decades of investment in ballistic missile technology, drone warfare, cyber capabilities, and an extensive network of proxy forces that extends across Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and beyond. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps is a powerful and highly motivated force that operates with a level of independence and aggression that makes it particularly difficult to deter. Iran has spent years preparing for exactly this kind of scenario, developing asymmetric capabilities specifically designed to counter American military superiority. The drone and missile programs that Iran has developed are not trivial. Iranian drones have been supplied to Russian forces in Ukraine, used by Hezbollah in Lebanon, deployed by the Houthis in Yemen, and utilized by various militia groups in Iraq and Syria. These are capable systems that have demonstrated their effectiveness in real-world combat conditions. When Iran says it is firing back, it has the tools and the experience to make that threat meaningful and painful. This is what makes any military exchange with Iran fundamentally different from dealing with a conventional, smaller adversary. We also need to talk about the role of Iran's proxy network in this broader conflict, because understanding that network is essential to understanding the full scope of what is at stake. Iran has invested enormously over many years in cultivating, arming, training, and directing a constellation of militias and armed groups across the Middle East. Hezbollah in Lebanon remains Iran's most powerful and capable proxy, a force that possesses a vast arsenal of rockets and missiles capable of striking deep into Israeli territory. The Houthis in Yemen have demonstrated a remarkable ability to strike targets at long range, including attacks on Saudi Arabia and on commercial shipping in the Red Sea. Iraqi militia groups have repeatedly targeted American forces and interests in Iraq. Syrian military infrastructure provides Iran with a forward operating presence close to Israel's borders. All of these elements are now part of the strategic equation as we assess the current escalation. When the United States strikes Iranian targets, the response does not necessarily come only from Iran directly. It can come from any one or several of these proxy forces, creating a multi-front challenge that stretches American and allied military resources and attention across a vast geographic area. This is a deliberate feature of Iran's strategic design, not an accident. Iran has built this system precisely because it allows Tehran to respond to American pressure in ways that are deniable, diffuse, and difficult to counter effectively. The political dimensions of what is happening are equally important to understand. Back in Washington, the administration is facing intense scrutiny and pressure from multiple directions. There are those within the political establishment who believe that military action against Iran has been long overdue, that years of maximum pressure followed by diplomatic engagement have failed to deter Iranian aggression, and that only a demonstration of military force will compel Tehran to change its behavior. On the other side, there are serious and credible voices warning that military strikes risk triggering a wider regional war, drawing American forces into another prolonged Middle Eastern conflict at a time when the country is already stretched thin, and the American public has little appetite for another major military engagement overseas. This debate is not new, but the stakes of getting it wrong have never felt higher. The decisions made in the coming hours and days will have consequences that extend far beyond the immediate military situation. They will shape the regional order, affect the security of American allies, including Israel and the Gulf states, influence global energy markets, and determine whether the broader Middle East slides deeper into instability or finds some way back from the edge. Speaking of energy markets, we cannot ignore the economic dimensions of what is happening. Iran sits at a strategically critical location in the Persian Gulf, and any significant escalation involving Iranian military forces raises the prospect of disruption to one of the world's most vital waterways. The Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly a fifth of the world's oil supply passes, is one of Iran's most powerful leverage points. Iranian officials have threatened on multiple occasions to close the strait in the event of military conflict, and while such an action would hurt Iran as well, the economic devastation it would cause to global energy markets could be enormous. Oil prices have already been moving in response to the news, and traders and analysts are watching developments with extreme attention. The international community is also responding to these developments, and the reactions from various capitals tell their own story about the geopolitical stakes involved. America's closest allies in the region, particularly Israel and Saudi Arabia, are watching events with a complex mixture of concern and interest. Israel has its own direct and deeply adversarial relationship with Iran, and any degradation of Iranian military capabilities is viewed favorably in Jerusalem. At the same time, Israeli officials are acutely aware that any Iranian retaliation could include strikes directed at Israeli territory or at Israeli interests through Hezbollah and other proxies. The Gulf states, particularly Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, have their own complicated calculations. These nations have spent years locked in a Cold War with Iran, supporting opposing sides in regional conflicts, and navigating the difficult terrain between their security dependence on the United States and their geographic proximity to Iran. They want Iranian power curtailed, but they also live in the neighborhood and understand that a full-scale regional war would have devastating consequences for their own stability and prosperity. Russia and China, meanwhile, have been consistent defenders of Iran's right to sovereignty and have opposed American military action in the region. Moscow and Beijing have both cultivated relationships with Tehran that serve their own strategic interests in countering American influence and in maintaining access to Iranian energy resources and markets. We can expect statements from both capitals condemning the American strikes and calling for restraint, though whether either power will take any concrete action to support Iran in a military sense remains to be seen. European allies have been in a difficult position throughout the build-up to this crisis. The major European powers, particularly France, Germany, and the United Kingdom, have tried to maintain some form of diplomatic engagement with Iran while standing firmly with their American ally. They have watched with growing alarm as the situation deteriorated, and they have been urging restraint and dialogue. Now that military action has occurred, European leaders face the challenge of responding in a way that preserves their credibility as American allies, while also making clear their concerns about escalation and their preference for a diplomatic path forward. Within Iran itself, the domestic political situation adds another layer of complexity. The Iranian government, led by Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, faces its own pressures and calculations. The Iranian people have lived through decades of sanctions and economic hardship, and public opinion in Iran is not monolithic. There are reformists, pragmatists, and ordinary Iranians who would prefer a different relationship with the outside world. But there is also a deeply entrenched and powerful conservative establishment, centered on the Revolutionary Guard and the religious institutions, that has built its identity and its power around defiance of the United States, and around the narrative of resistance and martyrdom that is central to the Islamic Republic's founding ideology. For Khamenei and the hardliners, backing down in the face of American military strikes is simply not a viable political option. To do so would be to undermine the entire ideological foundation of the Islamic Republic and to invite the kind of domestic challenge that the regime fears most. This is why Iran fired back, and this is why, regardless of the military balance of forces, we should expect Iran to continue seeking ways to respond, retaliate, and restore what Tehran will describe as deterrence and dignity. The Iranian system is built for exactly this kind of confrontation, and its leaders have demonstrated over decades that they are willing to absorb enormous economic and political pain in service of their strategic and ideological objectives. The nuclear dimension of this crisis also demands serious attention. For years, the international community has been engaged in a fraught and frustrating effort to constrain Iran's nuclear program through diplomacy, sanctions, and pressure. The original Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal, negotiated during the Obama administration, represented the most significant diplomatic achievement in that effort, but it began to unravel after the United States withdrew from the agreement in 2018. Since then, Iran has dramatically expanded its nuclear activities, enriching uranium to levels approaching weapons grade, and developing capabilities that have brought it uncomfortably close to being able to produce a nuclear weapon, should it choose to do so. The fear among American and allied officials is that military confrontation could accelerate rather than slow Iran's nuclear ambitions. If Iran's leadership concludes that it faces an existential threat and that conventional military means are insufficient to deter the United States, the logic of acquiring a nuclear deterrent becomes even more compelling. This is one of the deepest paradoxes of dealing with Iran, that military pressure designed to constrain Iranian power could inadvertently provide the strongest possible incentive for Tehran to push forward with nuclear weapons development as the ultimate guarantee of regime survival. For the people of the region, both in Iran and in the surrounding countries, what is happening right now is not an abstract geopolitical exercise. It is a reality that is threatening lives, disrupting communities, and generating fear and uncertainty on a massive scale. Families in the region are watching the news with the knowledge that the decisions being made by powerful men in distant capitals and military headquarters could determine the shape of their lives and futures in the most immediate and direct way. The human cost of military escalation in this already fragile and conflict-worn region would be incalculable, and that reality must be kept at the center of any serious analysis of what is happening. American military personnel and their families are also living through this moment with deep personal stakes. The men and women who serve in uniform across the Middle East, in bases in Iraq, in Qatar, in Bahrain, in Kuwait, in Jordan, and aboard naval vessels in the Persian Gulf, are now on the front lines of a confrontation that has moved with frightening speed from a state of elevated tension to actual military exchange. Their safety, their readiness, and their mission are all now directly implicated in whatever happens next. The question that everyone is asking, and that no one can answer with certainty, is where this goes from here. The scenarios range from a managed de-escalation, where both sides, having demonstrated resolve and taken their shots, find ways through back channels and third-party intermediaries to step back from the brink, all the way to a full-scale regional conflict involving multiple nations, proxy forces, and potentially catastrophic consequences for the entire Middle East and beyond. History tells us that both outcomes are possible, and history also tells us that the path between them is narrow, treacherous, and dependent on decisions and judgments made under enormous pressure and with imperfect information. What we can say with confidence is that this is a moment that demands the most serious and sustained attention from leaders, analysts, and citizens alike. The decisions made in the coming hours and days will not just determine the immediate military outcome of this exchange. They will shape the future of one of the world's most strategically important regions for years, and possibly decades to come. They will test the strength and coherence of American alliances, reveal the true nature and limits of Iranian power and resilience, and demonstrate whether the international community retains any meaningful capacity to manage and contain dangerous conflicts in the modern era. What we are witnessing is the latest and most dramatic chapter in a conflict that has been building for a very long time. The United States and Iran have been on a collision course shaped by history, ideology, strategic rivalry, and a series of decisions and events that have repeatedly foreclosed diplomatic options and narrowed the space for peaceful resolution. Whether the current escalation leads to a genuine reckoning with that reality, or whether it simply adds another brutal chapter to an already long and painful story, remains to be seen. What is clear, what every serious observer understands, is that the stakes could not be higher. A miscalculation, a misjudgment, a single decision made in haste or in anger could trigger consequences that no one is fully prepared to manage. That is the world we are living in tonight. That is the gravity of what is unfolding as we speak, and it is why every detail, every development, every signal and statement from both sides must be watched, analyzed, and understood as carefully and as completely as possible. We will continue to bring you the latest developments as this situation evolves. Our correspondents are on the ground across the region. Our analysts are working around the clock, and our commitment is to give you the clearest and most complete picture of what is happening and what it means. Stay with us. This story is far from over, and the world is watching.